A lot of people think that teachers are generally the same. After all, most teachers who teach the same subject present from the same curriculum guide. They present in the same school. Often, their rooms look very similar. So what is it about these teachers, or these classes, or these courses that makes them different? With all these similarities, what is it that makes one teacher different than another? The first characteristic is classroom management, or classroom control. After all, before you can even begin to think about teaching a curriculum, you have to have a classroom environment that is conducive to learning. It's up to you as the teacher to set the tone for the room. You're the adult in the room. And all too often, new teachers are hesitant to become the authority.
Can the teacher control the students? Can they build in the rules and then enforce them? The answer to that has to be yes. Evidence of that would be, yeah, the teacher has a clear set of rules. The teacher knows exactly what's right and what's wrong and is able to enforce that fairly and consistently throughout the lesson so that the boundaries don't change and the students know what the teacher expects and the teacher enforces that at every opportunity.
I know you've worked with a lot of first-year teachers. Is there a common mistake that most of them make?
I think there's a couple. I think one, they start off where they're too friendly. When I say develop a relationship with a student, I don't mean to be their buddy necessarily. They have plenty of friends their own age. What I mean by a relationship is to show that you care about them and what they're interested in and that you want them to succeed. You can always lighten up as the year goes on, but I think it's early on to establish those procedures and those routines and let them know that you mean business and why they're there. I think that really helps you in the long run.
Now, the next characteristic of a successful teacher I like to call deliberate instruction. That means that the lessons presented by a teacher are intentional. They're well planned, first of all. A good teacher doesn't rely on his or her content knowledge alone. No matter how familiar you are with your subject, you can't expect simply to walk into a room and teach a fantastic lesson every time. You need to prepare ahead of time. That way, you understand all of the ins and outs of the topic at hand. New teachers that try to wing it and make up the lesson as they go find out very quickly that that's not going to work. Aside from understanding their content, a deliberate lesson planner also understands his or her audience. They understand the ways in which their students learn the best. That means adjusting the way you deliver your instruction and also about how you're going to set expectations in the classroom.
Lavanya, who's your favorite teacher?
Ms. Lamb, because she was very, she understood us, even though she was much older than us, and she gave us work, but she explained to us how to do it, and she, if we didn't understand how to do it, she would take us and do it in the corner with us.
I think my favorite teacher is Miss Lindsay. And she was everybody's favorite. Everybody liked her a lot. She was like on our level, teenagers. She had a lot of fun with us, a lot of jokes, and she made like the class, our science class, a little exciting, such as projects and on-hand experience.
The learning environment has to be prepared. But the next thing that has to occur is the teacher has to have a well-planned lesson. That's based on the curriculum, but also based on the needs of the students. All students are different, and some of them learn quite differently. And so the teacher has to take all this into consideration and plan lessons or activities or events within a lesson that meet all the needs of the kids there. Students learn differently, plan accordingly.
You must have a clearly stated objective. The students must know exactly where they're trying to go, and obviously it is your job to help them get there. But you must have a clearly stated objective. So that is extremely important. You think about the components of a lesson, and traditionally you think about the objectives and the warm-up and the open and the closure. And all those things are important, but with all of the creativity that is allowed in the classrooms now, the order of those things for me as an observer is not as important as we still know what it is that you're trying to accomplish. And with that, the second most important thing for me is that you're not teaching this one concept the same way to all students. I know that is very challenging. You have 30 students in your classroom with this one concept, but we just cannot overlook that all students do not learn the same way. So you must really focus on differentiating that lesson through some small groups to the left, some students coming up to your desk in the front. And it's not just about giving them different activities to do, but also maybe varying the type of lesson with the same objective. So making sure that you have a clear focus along with making sure that you're differentiating the lessons so that you can address the needs of all the learners in your classroom.
The third characteristic of a successful teacher is a teacher who has clear and high expectations of their students. What does that mean? Basically, it means that not only do students understand what it is they're supposed to learn, but they also understand what your expectations are as a teacher. They understand how they're supposed to behave. They understand how they're supposed to conduct themselves during a group activity. If students meet your expectations without you continuously and constantly needing to state what those expectations are, then you're meeting that characteristic.
I would have to say my favorite teacher was from last year, Mr. Goldstein. He made the lessons fun, but at the same time, he was the strictest teacher we had, so.
Did you learn anything?
Oh yeah, I learned a lot.
Moving on the list to number 4, professionalism. You can't be a good teacher without being a consummate professional. Professionalism is reflected in the way you conduct yourself in school, in the way you dress, in the way you communicate with students, with fellow teachers, with administrators. In fact, if you don't communicate professionally, then you're living a hypocritical life. You're setting your students' expectations high, but your own personal expectations low.
The profession of teaching is one that commands great respect in the community. And the best way to keep that respect is to model good citizenship. When you're in the building, when you're in a parking lot, when you're in the grocery store or hardware store, model it.
Finally, good teachers embrace their individual style. Teachers aren't computers in a computer lab, here to communicate information exactly the same way every time, through exactly the same means. Don't be afraid to draw on your own personal experiences, and your own personal likes and dislikes, and your own personal strengths and weaknesses as an individual when you're preparing lessons. If you embrace your individuality, not only do you become more interested in the subject, but so do the students by proxy. The students are able to detect when someone is genuinely interested in something and when they're just putting on a brave face to make it seem interesting for their sake. They're much more willing to buy in to you as a teacher and to the lesson at large if they can detect that you are genuinely interested in what you're doing. And the best way to do that is to present it in a way that is personally interesting for you. When you have passion for something, that rubs off on them.
I have observed that new teachers tend to take all the advice from all of the tenured teachers. And I personally think that is a mistake. I mean, definitely tenured teachers have experience and they definitely have wisdom that you absolutely can use in your classroom. However, you are an individual and you have to allow your personality to show within your classroom. And when you're picking up personality traits from someone else, it makes it very challenging for you to be yourself. Therefore, you struggle with how you think the classroom management should go, how you think you should handle discipline, because you're not being yourself. You are simply following the advice of others without taking into account why you entered into this profession and why it is that you do what you do. And you do those because of your own personality, and you have to let that shine, and you have to learn from your own experiences, the good and the bad, and from there, then you can develop and grow into the person that you want to be. Because just like children are different, teachers are different also.
So we've talked about 5 of the most important characteristics of a good teacher. We said that a good teacher has to have good class control, has to present deliberate instruction, needs to have clear and high expectations. A good teacher is a consummate professional. And a good teacher will always embrace his or her individual style. But good teachers are not merely a product of all these characteristics. Instead, these characteristics are an outgrowth of one common trait that the best teachers have.
My very first job interview was tough because I wasn't sure what to expect, but I learned a lot from it. And it went like this. As I was talking with the building principal, he had one question. And that question was, do you like kids? Of course, I looked at him like he had 3 heads, thinking, well, what kind of question is that? I'm fresh out of college and I got all these degrees. I'm a content master. I can teach and I've done all this, done all that. And he only cared about whether I like kids. And so I said yes, and that was the end of the interview. I'll never forget that, because he told me in that one question what he thought was the most important part of teaching. And I learned from that. And now that I've done it for a lot of years, and I myself have interviewed hundreds of teachers, the one characteristic that separates good teachers from great teachers is the love of kids.
A teacher has to care about their students and try to develop relationships with the students, because if they don't, they'll never really get the content across. I think that comes first. Comes first, the relationship.
Mm-hmm. Is it possible to be a great teacher without developing a personal relationship with the students?
I don't think I've seen that happen in my 20 plus years. I think that's a must, that you have to develop that relationship. And I also think more so nowadays, where students question things more, they don't accept the fact that just because you're an adult that they have to listen to you. I think it's more essential than ever that you develop that relationship and that trust with the student, show that you care and you have interest in them.
A good teacher has been characterized in many ways by many people, but when I think of my personal experience and through observation, the first thing I think about is a teacher who simply cares about teaching. And not just cares about teaching and the content, but they care about the students in their classroom. Students come to the classroom with different backgrounds, they have different experiences, different cultural experiences. And I think it's extremely important for teachers to identify with those students and make some type of connection. Because prior to teaching the content, the child they must know that you care. And when I reflect back on some of my favorite teachers, it wasn't because they were Teacher of the Year, it wasn't because they taught the content the best, it was simply because I knew they cared about me, and as a result of being a student, I worked harder. So when I was in the classroom, I wanted to build a relationship with those students. How are you doing today? How's your family doing? And at the time, my favorite teacher was my third grade teacher. And I remember at the time my youngest brother was born. And she took so much interest in inquiring about my younger brother, because that was important to me. So I wanted to work harder just to make her happy. And it all worked together. So then she was able to manipulate me in her own ways with the content, with the instruction, and I didn't realize it because of the relationship that we had.
Teachers are expected to do a lot of things, and when I interview teachers, I expect that they already know the content, that they are model citizens, that they will show up for work on time and be planned for every lesson. That's expected. But what really is the defining moment is when there is evidence that that teacher or that teacher candidate loves kids and will do what it takes to make sure that they learn. That's the difference. That's what makes a great teacher.